Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. It is Thursday, so we will start as we usually do, just with a brief overview of where we are up to in the Rambam. We are in volume 6, which means we've already concluded the first 5 volumes of the Rambam, and this Saturday night we'll have an opportunity to celebrate that. I'll post on the WhatsApp group the details to join the Siyum HaRambam. And within the 6th book, we are in the 2nd section, the laws of vOWS. There are 13 chapters. Tomorrow we'll be concluding all the laws of vOWS. It's a beautiful chapter, actually, chapter 13. So try to join tomorrow if you can. And then as far as this section of vOWS, there are 13 chapters. The first 3 gave us the principles of vOWS. Then we spoke about permitting vOWS, vOWS between people, the logic and implication of vOWS, and finally, annulling one's wife's vOWS. And that's what we started learning yesterday. We'll continue learning today and conclude learning tomorrow. And here is chapter 12. It says 5, but it is actually chapter 12, most of the halachas. So, for starters, the Rambam says that there's a difference between the father and the husband's ability to annul a vow. Because a father can annul any vow taken by his daughter, as long as it's on the day he hears of them. If he didn't annul it on that day, then her vows are standing. He cannot annul them. A husband, by contrast, may nullify only those vows and oaths that either involve personal aggravation, or I called it afflictive vows, or there were matters that affect the marriage relationship, spousal vows, meaning vows that had to do with between him and her and his wife. For example, she took an oath or vow not to put on an eye paint or wear jewelry. So this is an example of a vow that's very much affects their relationship, because certainly she should be attracted to him. This is implied by the verse between a man and his wife. So again, although a father can annul any vow of his daughter, a husband may annul only vows that either are afflictive or affect his relationship. So what does this mean? What's the difference between afflictive vows and vows that affect the relationship? So with regards to vows that involve personal aggravation, his nullification as bearing for himself. So now we're saying, sorry, in halacha 2, there's actually a distinction between a vow that you took that's afflictive and a vow that you took that affects their relationship. If it's a vow that you took that is afflictive and he annuls it, then it's annulled for everybody, meaning that it doesn't stand, it no longer stands at all. But if it's a vow that you took that affected their relationship, when he nullifies this vow, he only nullifies it from himself. But if she is to get divorced and to marry another man, then the vow that she took would be binding. So again, if it's a vow that's afflictive, then when he nullifies it, it's completely nullified. But if it's a vow between her and her husband, then when he nullifies it, he only nullifies it as far as the current relationship. So let's spell this out. What is implied? She took a vow not to eat meat, so that's afflictive. He may nullify it and she will be permitted to eat meat even if she marries any other person forever. But if she forbade marital intimacy with any man, he may nullify the vow with regards to himself, at which point she'll be allowed to engage in intimacy with him. We'll discuss this more later in the chapter. But if he dies or divorces her, she would be forbidden to engage in intimacy with all other men, obviously, unless she got her vow annulled by a sage, which was what we discussed earlier. And the same would apply in all other scenarios. So whether the aggravation is of a minor nature or a major nature, as long as it's an afflictive vow, if it's for a short time or a long time, the husband has the right to nullify all such vows completely. What is implied? She took a vow or an oath not to bathe today, not to drink wine today, not to eat honey today. He may nullify the vows. This also applies if she vowed not to put on eye paint today or not to wear colored woven garments today. So whether it's a vow that's afflictive, or it's a vow that relates to the relationship, he can annul it in all similar situations as well. If she took a vow not to partake of an unpleasant food or a type of food that she had never eaten, again, this is afflictive and he may annul it. But if she took a vow not to partake of 2 loaves of bread, okay, and not partaking of one would cause her aggravation, but not partaking of the other would not cause the aggravation. Why not? This is discussed by the commentaries. Some say because no woman is eating 2 loaves of bread, so the second bread is already redundant, so that's not considered afflictive at all. So her husband can only nullify the first vow, which causes her aggravation. He would not be allowed to nullify the second vow because that's not considered afflictive. As we said, a husband can only annul either a vow that causes affliction or aggravation, or if it's between him and his wife. But here that she took 2 vows on one and a second loaf of bread, the first loaf was afflictive because she'll be hungry. The second is not because she's never going to eat it. When a woman takes a vow not to eat figs from her native country, her husband may nullify a vow, not because it's afflictive, because there are lots of other things she could eat, but because it affects the marriage, where it is a major problem for him to undertake the difficulty of bringing her figs from another place. Although it's not afflictive because she can still get figs from elsewhere, it definitely is a nuisance to him, and therefore on that basis it would be allowed to annul it. Therefore, if he dies, divorces her, another person brings her figs from her native country, they are forbidden to her because, as we said, when he annuls vows, or when he nullifies a vow that affects the relationship, he's only able to annul it for himself, but not for others. Halacha number 8. Similarly, if she took an oath not to benefit from people at large, even though her husband is not included in the vow, he has the right to nullify it because it affects the marriage relationship. Otherwise, it's going to come back to him. Otherwise, he will have to give her food only from his own resources. So if she's saying that she's not going to benefit from others, it means that now it's all hanging on him. Similarly, he may nullify the vow if she takes a vow forbidding her from benefiting from an entire nation, all the Jews or all the Ishmaelites. So that is all as far as afflictive versus spousal vows. Now moving on to the next discussion. What happens if she took a vow to forbid benefit from him or from her, of each other? Let's see that. A few scenarios, the next 3 halachas. So if a woman were to tell her husband, pleasure from intimacy with me is forbidden to you. In other words, I forbid you from having intimate benefit from me. So such a vow doesn't even need to be nullified because it doesn't come into existence in the first place. So what can that be compared to? Someone who forbids the owner of fruit from benefiting from his own fruit. You can't go over to Joe Schmo and say that you can't eat your fruits. Similarly, and over here, one of the responsibilities that a woman has to her husband is that she will be intimate with him. And therefore, if she takes such a vow, the vow simply, she doesn't have the right to forbid that from him. The same goes in the reverse. If he tells her, pleasure from intimacy with me is forbidden to you. In other words, he tells her, I forbid you from having pleasure from me, intimate pleasure from me. Again, his statements are of no consequence. The vow is not binding because he's obligated to provide her with sustenance, clothing, and intimacy, as we explained in the laws of marriage. So here, a person can't undo something that says clearly in the Torah otherwise. Since the Torah says that he has a right to have benefit from her, and she has a right to have benefit from him as far as intimacy is concerned. If they were to make a vow to the contrary, such a vow would not be binding. If, however, she told him, pleasure from intimacy with you, this is tricky, is forbidden to me, meaning she didn't say that you can't benefit from me. She said, I'm making a vow that I will not benefit from you. So then that is binding, because the Torah doesn't say that a woman is obligated to give herself benefits from her husband, or a man is obligated to give himself benefit from his wife. The obligation is to the other person. So since here, she took a vow that she won't have benefits from him, he needs to nullify the vow. And if he doesn't, then it is forbidden for him to engage in relations with her. Why? Because we can't force a person to partake of food that's forbidden to him. So although the Torah says that part of her responsibilities to her husband is that he should be able to be engaged in intimacy, since she took the vow upon herself, so the vow is binding because the vow didn't directly conflict with the Torah requirement. It only indirectly conflicted, and therefore he would have to annul it. Otherwise, they would not be allowed to engage in intimacy. If she said, so here's another story, not by intimacy, but other things that she has that she has a responsibility to her husband. So if she says, my hands may be sanctified to the one who made them, meaning that nobody could benefit from my hands. Meaning anything she does with her hands, nobody could benefit from. Or she took a vow that he would not benefit from the labor of her hands, more specifically. So he is not forbidden. Again, the vow is not binding. Why? Because the Torah clearly says that a man is required to support his wife, and he needs to provide for her, but therefore the work of her hands go to her husband. So it goes in two directions. The husband needs to provide for her, but what she makes goes to her husband. And therefore, since that's connected to him, the Torah says that the work of her hand goes to her husband, since he provides for her. Therefore, if he took such an oath, she took such an oath, it would not be binding. Although our sages declared that, what's the Hebrew over here for emancipation? Freeing a slave, it means. The prohibition against chametz, consecration, sever a lion. So basically what that means is that if I lent money to Joshua and then I sell the loan to somebody else, and then I go and I forgive the loan that I just sold. So I am able to forgive the loan because since the loan was originally set up with me, even though I sold it, I'm still able to annul it. So you may have thought, and the similar discussion with chametz, if a chametz was taken as security and then Pesach came along, different scenarios, or a person again had given something, lent something, and then he said that he's making it holy to the temple. So in all these scenarios, the person's acts override the lion, meaning that although I sold the loan, I'm still able to cancel it. So you might think the same would go over here. Although the Torah says that the work of a woman's hands go to her husband because he supports her, maybe she would still be able to take an oath that would override that. No, says the Torah. Why? Very interesting. Since it was the rabbis that instituted that the man is obligated to support her and therefore the work of her hands go to her husband, in order to give strength to the words of the sages, they gave so much added weight to say that nothing can get in the way. And so even if she takes an oath, it doesn't undermine that the work of her hands go to her husband. That would remain in place unless a divorce took place. Sorry, he must, however, nullify the vow, final point. So although the vow is not binding, he still does need to nullify it in case they get divorced and then remarried, at which point the oath would precede the binding of the second marriage, and for that reason, he should annul the vow. Wow, that was a little complicated. One more halacha relating to them forbidding benefit from each other. If she took an oath or a vow that neither the father of her husband, his brothers, or any of his other relatives will benefit from her. So she said, I take a vow that I don't want my father-in-law, my brothers-in-law, none of them, I don't want them to be benefiting from my work. So not only is the vow binding, but he cannot even nullify it. Because she didn't marry her brothers-in-law, she married him. Similarly, he may not nullify a vow if she vows not to bring his animal water, straw for his cattle, or the like. The rationale is that these vows do not aggravate the soul, nor do they affect the marriage relationship, since they are not of the tasks that she is obligated to perform. So since they don't directly impact neither a fiction on herself nor the relationship, such vows her husband does not have the authority to nullify. Okay, here's an interesting one, vows that haven't yet taken effect. A husband and a father may nullify vows that haven't yet taken effect. What is implied? Meaning they haven't yet caused it to be prohibited from something. If she said, wine will be forbidden to me if I go to this and this place, even though she hasn't yet gone to that place, and so the vow hasn't yet taken effect, and the wine is not yet forbidden, the vow still may be nullified by her husband. Similar law applies in all similar situations. Next to halachos, people that are ineligible to annul vows or to nullify vows, a father and a husband who is deaf may not nullify vows, even though a husband may nullify vows which he has not heard, meaning if he didn't hear her saying it, but he knows she took it, he can nullify it. That's because he's able to hear. But if he's unable to hear, then he is not considered eligible to nullify the vow. The same would go if the father or the husband were intellectually or emotionally unstable. They may not nullify a vow. Also, a minor can't nullify a vow, but that's because he's not married, because a marriage is not binding with the minor, the husband, that is. Accordingly, he may not nullify a vow. A husband may nullify the vows of two of his wives simultaneously. Similarly, a father may nullify the vow of two of his daughters simultaneously. As far as a man having two wives, we've discussed this elsewhere, how today this is not allowed in most of the Jewish society by a law that was instituted by Rabbeinu Gershon. Okay, before nightfall. So the nullification of vows that the father or husband would do needs to take place. It could take place any time that day, but not for 24 hours. Meaning, if you took a vow at the beginning of Sunday night, so the vow may be nullified throughout that night and the following day, because the Jewish day starts at night and ends at night. So if it was Sunday night, it's already the beginning of Monday. When she took a vow at the conclusion of the day, just before nightfall, if you nullify the vow before nightfall, it's nullified. But if you only nullified it 30 minutes later, after nightfall, it's already considered the next day, and he loses his authority to do so. If so, what is meant by the words of the Torah from one day to the next? So that doesn't mean that it goes by 24 hours. Rather, it means that if she takes the vow at night, he can still nullify it the following day. And he may nullify it throughout the following day. If she took a vow and waited several days, and only then her father or husband heard of it, then they can nullify it, because the day that they hear of it is considered as if it's the day that she took it. So the day that the husband or father hear of the vow, they are able to nullify it. Finally, the last few halachos, which we didn't get to in the PowerPoint. If a father or a husband, 17. Yes. Yeah. So here's an interesting one. We've learned earlier that there are two stages in marriage. There's the kiddushin and then the nisuin. First, he says, "You are mukudeshes, arayat mukudeshes," and he gives the ring, and then he brings her into his home. Once upon a time, there would be a time period between the two. So if after stage one, after he consecrated her, but didn't yet bring her into his home, she took a vow, and her father heard of it and nullified it on the spot, but the I wouldn't call it full-fledged husband, but the somewhat husband, the eros, heard about it only a few days later. So then it's not nullified. Both the father and the husband need to hear about it on the same day. Or the reverse. If a father, so he brings the pasuk for this, if a father prevented her on the day that he heard of it, if she was married to a man with vows incumbent upon her, if her husband heard of it on the day he heard of it, from this we infer, since her father nullified it and her eros heard of it, he must nullify it on the same day that the father did. Similarly, if her heiress heard right away and nullified it, and only the father heard a few days later and nullified it, again, the nullification is invalid. How do we know that the verse is speaking about a consecrated maiden as opposed to a woman that's completely married? Because further on in the passage, it says, if she vows in her husband's home. So what's implied is in the latter scenario, he's moved into the home. And then it's just up to the husband. So here it's talking about where she hasn't yet moved into the home. I see we've hit 1:30, but we're almost done. When a father or husband hears of a vow and remains silent in order to cause her aggravation. In other words, his intent is to annul it, but he's being a really bad guy, and he's first waiting a little bit so that she thinks it's binding, and then afterwards he intends to nullify it. So if he ends up forgetting to nullify it and the day passed, then the vow is binding. Okay, here's an interesting one, which is what I mentioned on the WhatsApp group. If she took a vow and her father and her husband nullified it, she didn't know they nullified it. And she decided to intentionally violate her vow. So she tried to sin, but she didn't realize that there was no sin because the vow she was violating had already been nullified. So she is not liable. Although at the end we'll say she should still be given stripes of rebellion for intending to sin. Although she had the intent of transgressing, since she committed a permitted act, she's exempt. Concerning this, the Torah says Hashem will forgive her, although her father prevented her. She is given stripes for rebellious conduct because she had the intent to sin. When she takes a vow and violates a vow, When she takes a vow and violates a vow before her father or husband nullifies it, so if she made a vow, she transgressed the vow, and then it was nullified, so then she's liable for whatever it is, whether it be lashes or sacrifice, whether it was intentional or unintentional, because they only nullified it afterwards, as opposed to, another scenario where sometimes a vow can be annulled in a way that it's as if it never took place in the first place. But in this scenario, we say that the vow actually is binding, and so when it's nullified, it's not nullified retroactively. It's only nullified going forwards. 20. If a father or husband heard of a woman's vow but remained silent. Why? He didn't remain silent because he wanted the vow to stand, but because he didn't know that he has the authority to nullify it. So this is very interesting. It's as if he didn't hear the vow taking place. And the moment he learns that he has the authority to annul it, that is considered as if that's when he heard it in the first place, and therefore he will be allowed to annul the vow. Finally, halacha 21, when a nullification is made in error, one must return and nullify it again. What are examples of this? If his wife took a vow and he thought, honestly, I don't know how this would play out in real life. It sounds like this is just in the wisdom of Hashem. So we're learning Hashem's wisdom, but I can't imagine this actually ever happened. But the scenario over here is that he thought that she wasn't his wife, but his daughter. Okay. And he nullified it as if he was nullifying his daughter's vow, when really he was nullifying his wife's vow. So, or she took a Nazirite vow and he thought that she had vowed on a sacrifice, and he nullified it with the intent that she vowed on a sacrifice, when really she vowed as a Nazirite. Or third example, she forbade herself to partake of figs, and he thought she said grapes, and nullified a vow of grapes, when really she took a vow of figs. In all these scenarios, he needs to re-nullify the vow. He needs to know the true identity of the woman and the true nature of the vow. We see this from the pasuk that says her father did not prevent her, which indicates that he needs to have in mind the woman taking the vow, and her father heard her vow seems to imply that he knows which vow it was. So in conclusion, in order for a father or a husband to nullify a vow, they need to know who the woman is, and they need to know the nature of the vow. Thank you so much for joining. Your commitment is legendary. Should only bring you lots of brachos, and once again a reminder that